Right. Hello and welcome to episode 177 of the Chills at Will podcast. What a pleasure today to be joined by Laura Warrell. And here's a bit about Laura. She's a contributor to the Bread Loaf Writers Conference and the Tin House Summer Workshop, and is a graduate of the Creative Writing program at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Her work has appeared in HuffPost, the Rumpus, and the Los Angeles Review of Books, among other publications. Sweet, Soft, Plenty Rhythm was published in September 2022 and has been rightly lauded since. The book is a finalist for the PEN/Faulkner Prize for Fiction, the PEN/Faulkner Prize for Fiction. It's a great read, and it'll be the main focus of our conversation today. Laura, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm very good and very excited to be here. It's fun to be talking about the book again. It's been a little while since I've been able
Yeah.
to, so thanks.
Did you have kind of a rush when it came out, like of like interviews and podcasts and stuff?
I did. I had a lot of interviews, a lot of podcasts. There was fortunately a lot of attention and buzz around the book. And then I've been going to a lot of book festivals, including
Yeah.
this year. So I've been talking a lot about the book, but now that I'm here talking to you, I realize it's been about a month or two.
Huh.
So there was like a flurry of activity for quite a long time,
Right.
actually. But yeah, it's nice to just be sitting here talking to you about it.
It's great to talk to you. I usually ask this towards the end, but like with the book coming, with the book being out for a while, and like you said, having a little bit of a pause, like are you, I don't know if you're working on something else. Is it somewhere like it takes you a little bit of recall to even like think about the book? Like you've not that you've moved on,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
but like is it tough to kind of recall? Is it something like you're immersed in another project right now, maybe, or projects?
Not necessarily. It's an interesting question though. I am working on the next book. You literally caught me on a day where I'm struggling with it. Yesterday I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. And today I'm like, do I start over? It's just the nature of the beast with this
Oh
work.
man.
But I think that, as writers, well, I won't speak for other writers. I have spent so much time with that book and with those
Hmm.
characters. It didn't necessarily take me a long time to write. I know writers who've, especially their debuts took them a decade or
Hmm.
longer. Um, it's more just that I really, as a writer, prioritize character. I enjoy really getting into my characters and getting to know who they are. And so I know them really well.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
know the story really well. I remember everything about it. I mean, I can't recall specific lines necessarily.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was such a huge part of my life for so long. Even after the first draft, I revised it. I don't even know how many times I revised it over the course of the life of the book, and then getting the agent, and then you know so it's in here. I think
Hmm.
it'll be years before I have trouble remembering
Yeah.
some of the details, but it's great. And it's funny, it, I think of the characters like there
Hmm.
were real people. I'll hear a song that reminds me of them.
Hmm.
And so they're like real people. Those were real experiences that I had writing those stories. So
Yeah.
it's easy to remember.
That's so cool to hear because the reader definitely gets that experience. I mean, a lot of characters, and but you pull it off. I mean, they're all memorable, even if
Mm-hmm.
they're kind of bit players, if you will. They're so
Mm-hmm.
memorable. But yeah, in the hands of a lesser writer, it could have been troublesome. But just so many people, I think Peach.
Mm-hmm.
Peach doesn't kind of disappears after I don't know halfway through the bookish,
Right.
but like what an interesting character. Like some of those scenes and
Yes.
her kind of like looking in the mirror and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so many interesting characters. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Great. Well, thank you for the compliment. I
Of
appreciate it.
course. I would love to know kind of going back, like where it all started. I mean, if you've been a reader ever since, from the jump, where writing came in, what were you reading like as a kid and as an adolescent?
Yeah, so I came to writing before I came to reading,
Hmm.
actually. I know I'm not alone in this, but started learning to write sentences and words, at 5 or 6, however old you do that.
Sure.
And I immediately started writing stories. I started writing books. I wrote a book called The Little Cat. And then I wrote a book called The Little Train. I was really into little things. And, I don't think my mother still has them. She had them for a while. But they were, I didn't really know how to spell, and the words were all strange and lopsided like children's words are, but I was attempting to write stories, and I never stopped. One of the things that's been really fun and quite rewarding for me during this journey with this book coming out is all of these people from every era of my life coming forward to congratulate me and show up and come to my events and buy the book. And I think it's because, everybody who has ever known me, including when I was in, 8 years old, I was writing something. And so it was always there. And then, of course, I read a lot too. And I think I really became, I was never like an avid reader. There's so many writers who are like, yes, you couldn't, I always had a book in my hand, and that wasn't necessarily true of me. I was always reading something. And, in high school, I discovered, Alice Walker was probably the first sort of literary novel that I read. I mean, I was reading silly things. I was reading a lot of Jackie Collins novels, in high school, because I was, hormonal and boys didn't like me. So I had to live vicariously through fiction. And then I think I discovered Alice Walker, and then I went through a Kerouac phase, obviously Toni Morrison, Kurt Vonnegut. I'm actually looking right now at my shelf. So a lot of those American writers that I think in high school and college you first come across and maybe hook you. So those were the first sort of writers. And then I discovered at some point Milan Kundera, who wrote The Unbearable Lightness of Being, and he became one of my favorites as well. So literary writers who really try to explore ideas and do something interesting with language. Those are the writers that I really gravitated toward.
I don't know if I read it somewhere or I heard it on one of the interviews with you, but it sounds like you wanted to be a movie star growing up.
I did, yeah. It was a funny thing. I was always writing. It was kind of bizarre to me to recall this, because I never chose to be a writer. I never thought, oh, maybe I'll be a writer. I just wrote. It was a thing I did.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I go to school and I ride my bike and I write stories. Isn't everybody doing the same thing? But yeah, I wanted to be an actress. I was actually, I auditioned for something in maybe 7th grade, and then I went to a school in high school where half the day you were at school and the other half of the day you were in a theater program, and I won an award. This was in Columbus, Ohio, so I wasn't, but so I was really serious. And then I went to college and I was going to major in theater. And then I think I sort of realized I don't think I'm as cool as these actors are, and I'm not like, I don't think I like this much attention, or at least not in the way that it seemed my peers did. I think I'm an extrovert, but I don't need people to stare at me all the time.
Sure.
And I think I felt like a little too exposed and a little too much like I was, it wasn't working as well for me. And I think I also was probably a little scared about that life as an actor. Having a book rejected is absolutely no fun, but standing in front of, a handful of people who say, no, thanks. I don't know if I would have had the stomach or had the courage, whatever you want to call it, for that. So, and I think I just kind of, when I was a girl and living in Ohio wasn't very exciting. And so acting and being in theater and watching movies all the time was a way to envision a more exciting life. But I think ultimately it wasn't really my bag.
Sure. Well, I mean, I've heard that Columbus, Ohio is like the Hollywood of the Midwest. Isn't that true?
Really?
No.
I'm going back.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's Ohio is a good place to be from. Like, I'm glad to be from there.
Sure.
I've still got that Midwestern spirit. But yeah, definitely wasn't the place to like shoot for the stars and catch them. You know.
Well, you think of like kind of like the literary stars, and I mean, there's a whole discussion about whether that's still a thing, like
Hmm.
back to like like Hemingway, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
People knew him whether they were readers or not.
Right.
Baldwin, was kind
Right.
of like the frustrated, all the like the frustrated writer and the one with the cigarette and the one you could
Yeah.
tell was just pumping out incredible content and you
Right.
know just really agonizing over it. More Toni Morrison, like you talk about. I think of like I don't know, maybe Joan Didion.
Hmm.
So who, as you got older, college and beyond, who were you reading, inspired by, and then kind of like what was there like a eureka moment or moments where you're like, I can do this, I'm good at this, people have given me positive feedback, that kind of thing.
It's interesting that you say that. The first point. I'm very conscious, or I think a lot about when I was a kid and I would watch talk shows, even like Letterman and stuff, would have authors.
Mm.
Like regularly authors would be on. I feel like Tom. No, why do I always mess it? Not Tom Robbins, but the guy who wrote Bonfire of the Vanities, whose
Oh
name
yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah.
Tom.
Ooh, Wolf.
Tom Wolfe, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember he was on Letterman a bunch,
Okay.
and you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
interesting. I think you're absolutely right that even if you're not a reader, or at least even if you weren't a reader back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
you knew who this guy was.
Sure.
And it does sort of feel like authors aren't holding the public's attention in the way that they used to.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, yeah, so once I got into college, like I said, I don't remember a significant shift. I don't remember like, I know what I'll do. I think I just sort of smoothly let the acting go. Like I was an acting major the first year,
Mm-hmm.
and then but I was taking writing classes and just kind of let the acting classes go and stuck with the writing. And I'm trying to remember authors who I read back then. Unfortunately, it was a very long time ago. But I mean, Toni Morrison for sure was, and will always be,
Mm-hmm.
an inspiration on so many different levels. When I got my MFA, I studied her one semester, just really stuck with her and tried to figure out the mechanics of how she did what she did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Toni Cade Bambara, um, and yeah, I'm trying to think of. It's a funny thing because I went the school where I went. I was able to get a multidisciplinary degree that I designed,
Oh wow.
and I thought that was a pretty cool thing to do. I felt very, in control of my
Mm.
education in a way that felt very rewarding. But now I can't recall anything I actually had to read. You know what I mean? And I think it's because I I mean there wasn't an English major there. So I think a lot of the programs that I've been in have been so focused on writing.
Yeah.
Um, but I really want to think of uh it'll come back to me as we're going. I
Sure.
don't remember. Okay, well, I remember I was trying to write something pretty sexy,
Mm.
and I had
Jackie
a
Collins? No.
no, not like literary sexy.
Okay.
And I had a mentor who gave me a book called Candy by why am I not remembering authors? Also something by the Marquis de Sade. Not that I was going in that
Mm.
direction with what I was
Huh.
writing. I don't know why he was necessarily giving me that, but for some reason he did.
I'm
Um,
sorry to interrupt you. Are we talking Luke Davies?
no, I will
No, there's a
if
book
we
called Candy.
pause,
Okay.
yeah,
Sure.
Candy. Um,
Yeah, no problem. Let's get
I
this
want to
right.
remember it now. It's not Luke Davies. It's right. Hold on. Terry Southern.
Okay.
Terry Southern, is that right? Yeah, I think it's Terry Southern.
Mhm.
No. Yeah, maybe that is it. It's a weird, if this is it, they've given it a very weird cover now. But I
Look,
think it is Terry Southern.
maybe Mason Hoffenberg and Terry Southern.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
Okay.
That seems strange, but
Yeah.
at any rate, yeah, so I was yeah, that's those are the collections of books that I remember.
Hmm.
Henry Miller
Okay.
was somebody who I kind of discovered in college and was inspired by. Marguerite Duras
Mm.
was somebody that I loved and still love. I read a little Anais Nin.
Mm.
I sort of have a fascination with European and international writers, obviously Gabriel Garcia Marquez, I
Yes.
discovered then, and 100 Years of Solitude, like many people, is still just like one of the
The peak.
all
Yeah.
time. Yeah,
Yeah.
just so I think, I don't necessarily have as many sort of off the beaten track writers that I was
Hmm.
introduced to in college. I think
Hmm.
that um my mentors were really trying to help us read this sort of canon
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and or canon adjacent work, and that's
Sure.
that's what I was reading.
Yeah. Yeah. So the you did teaching at Berklee College of Music, right?
Yes.
And so like I get this could be one question, or you could see it as two. I wonder, I'm just so interested in the idea of like creativity begetting other creativity, right? And
hmm
just like the idea of the muse or muses. And so I wonder about like with this particular book, if this book started at Berklee College, and or I just wonder about how teaching, I assume you're teaching like a
hmm
literature or writing class, right?
That's right. Yes.
I mean, I don't know much about Berklee. I thought of it as strictly music,
hmm
sound,
Yeah.
oral. So like I just wonder about how that was a catalyst for your creativity, was a catalyst for this book, and kind of how teaching there kind of informed your writing and your writing style.
It's a really good question, and interesting enough, I haven't been asked that a lot, even though they put it in my bio from the get-go. I haven't really been asked a lot about it. So yes, Berkeley is, for the people who don't know, in fact, I was just talking about it and somebody mentioned Berkeley, and I was like, oh, you know Boston? And they're like, no, I'm talking about Berkeley.
Yeah,
It's
not
like, oh wait,
Oakland.
no, there's actually another Berkeley. So the Berklee College of Music is a four-year university, and for sure, it's
Hmm.
all about music and sound and um, audio work,
Hmm.
art, arts. But they have to do like a regular degree, so they have general education requirements, which
Okay.
include literature courses, freshman comp.
Hmm.
So, and that's what I taught there, freshman comp and
Hmm.
and literature. And when I started writing this book, I wasn't yet teaching at Berkeley,
Hmm.
but I did know right off the bat that the male character, Circus Palmer, around which the women in the book's
Yep.
lives revolve around,
Sure.
I knew he was going to be a jazz musician from the get-go. There was
Hmm.
no question. And as soon as he came to me, he was a jazz musician, and we were done.
Hmm.
And then a year or so into it, I started teaching at Berkeley. And there's so many ways that I could describe how Berkeley inspired me. I mean,
Hmm.
walking through the halls or teaching a class, and literally down the hall, they're playing Proud Mary,
Hmm.
is just so satisfying. I
Hmm.
mean, the classes themselves went so much better, right? Because this was the environment that we were in.
Yeah.
And I'm also a writer who I admire. Steve Allman says this a lot. He's a super fan of musicians. I am too. If
Hmm.
I had another life to live, I would have, done what my mom said and paid attention during my piano lessons and become a
Hmm.
musician.
Hmm.
So For sure, I was inspired by that environment. And as far as the book goes, I learned a lot from it. There's actually a scene in the book early on where Circus is he's teaching a class, and he has an interaction with a student who's kind of an up-and-comer hotshot musician, and Circus wants to bond with the kid and have this sort of mentor-mentee relationship, and the kid really isn't taking him that seriously. I based that kid on somebody I knew, one of my students at Berklee. And then there were lots of moments that I would be watching these students in my class, whether they were interacting or just during my lectures, not paying attention to my lectures and doing things that, like, there was one kid, and I've mentioned him a lot because I this was real. I really took this from him. I'm lecturing and he's just playing an invisible piano. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, like, and not just like, but like literally, like, there was a song and he was playing it on this invisible piano. That's what it looked like to me. And so this idea, right, that the music is always in you. And maybe that's just me mythologizing a craft and a type of artist that I admire. But that's what I took from the experience at Berklee. But it was a really lovely, kind of perfect dynamic, right? To be teaching. I wasn't full-time there, but I was there every day. So I was hearing music, I was getting the vibe of musicians, the energy of musicians. I wouldn't generalize about anybody, or particularly any type of artist, but I think I did see enough similarities among musicians that seemed like distinctive traits that I could sort of bring into the characterizations of Circus and Maggie, who is his one of his lovers, who is a drummer. So it's the one thing I miss about Boston is I was sort of like, can I bring Berklee with me? Like, I know you guys, can I go to Los
Satellite
Angeles?
campus or something, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was wonderful teaching, and it definitely helped flesh out those characters.
Well, I mean, can you believe that people are immersed in something else than our lectures, my lectures as well? Can you believe that
I know. It's like, this is
we have so much
riveting.
wisdom, right? Riveting.
Yeah, it's
I
just
don't
funny
know.
because I mean, I sort of get it. Like, I totally get it. Like, I
Yes.
know that writing and literature isn't for everybody, but I also you sensed at Berklee, like, we're all going to be famous. We're all going to be famous musicians, right? So we
Of
don't need
course.
any of this extra stuff. And I get that energy. I was the same at their age. I'm just going to be a famous writer. I mean, I
Sure.
still liked studying other things,
Yeah.
but I get that mentality. So I was
Well,
really charmed by them. So.
and I love that the scene with is it Panos?
Yeah.
The scene you talked about where where Circus is trying to be a mentor and a mentee, and Panos is not a jerk, but he's definitely apathetic. He's kind of like, and there's so much in that scene. It's a fairly short scene, but it just has a lot of echoes throughout the book where, just this idea of like aging, right? I think of it. I mean, I was never a high level athlete, but just like, as you get older in athletics, the same kind of idea, right? Like, no, I used to be good. The older I get, the better I was, type of thing, right? And then you feel like when you're having to prove it to somebody, it feels worse. Like, and
Exactly.
Circus has legitimate, achievements, but it's just like the guy's just like, well, how many people follow you? Social media wise.
Well, and I think part of it too with him is, and I think this is true of a lot of people, maybe of all of us to a certain extent, that the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and our lives and who we are in the world. And he is allowing himself to believe, or telling himself, that he's a successful musician that is admirable, and that these students will be, are excited to be working with him, and maybe even lucky to be working with him. And there's so much he can do for them, and he's not recognizing. And I think this is unfortunately true for a lot of creative people, like the gap between where you are and where you could be, or where other people are in your field. And this kid Panos is gonna probably be pretty successful, and sees Circus, and his life is small.
Hmm.
And it's one of the many moments in the book where someone is reflecting back to circus, an image of him that doesn't really jibe with the one he has of
Yeah,
himself.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, the title, it's sweet, comma, soft, comma, plenty rhythm. Like, it came from a Jelly Roll Morton. Was it a song or just like a quote?
So it was a quote. He was talking about jazz.
Okay.
So it's jazz should be played sweet, soft, plenty rhythm.
So that's the way that you would. I just wonder how you would even like the cadence of how you would say it. Is
Yeah.
the commas that you follow? Okay.
Yeah.
Why jazz? I mean, what is it? It's been said that jazz is like the only true, like the only like holy with a W, the only wholly
Mm-hmm.
American style of
Yeah.
music, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why jazz? I mean, there's a lot in the book about. I mean, it's really interesting too about this idea of kind of fading with age, or
Mm-hmm.
fading is maybe too strong of a word, but jazz isn't on the top of the charts these days, right? I mean, it's not the most
Right.
popular music. You know, in the book, it's like, maybe you can make a good, living on soundtracks. Maybe,
Mm-hmm.
we have Taylor Swift and we have Kendrick Lamar. We don't necessarily have the big jazz
Right.
star. So I guess why jazz?
Well, and that's exactly why.
Hmm.
I liked the idea. It's funny, whenever I have talked about this book, when I was writing the book, as I've been promoting it, when I tell people about it at parties,
Hmm.
they always ask me, "Oh, when does it take place?" Because for most people, jazz isn't a
Right,
thing.
right,
You know what I
right.
mean? And so they think, "Oh, does it take place in the 50s or the 20s or
Hmm.
the whatever else?" And I liked the idea for this male character that he is devoting his life and making sacrifices and choosing and prioritizing over everything else an art form that, for a lot of people, it's not true, but for
Sure.
a lot of people is a dying art form, or at
Hmm.
least one that doesn't really have a lot of relevance in the culture anymore.
Yeah.
And so that was one reason. And you probably noticed that several characters, several of the women characters kind of ask him, "Well, why do you play jazz?" or "Who
Hmm.
listens to jazz anymore?" or not even sure if they really like it.
Hmm.
And I just want to say I love jazz, and it is still around. There are wonderful jazz musicians who are working today and doing incredible things. But for a lot of people, I think, for sure, it doesn't hold the place it used to in the
Hmm.
culture. Like we were saying about writers,
Hmm.
there was a time that these jazz musicians were on par with the Taylor Swifts of their day,
Hmm.
right? Now you go to an average American, they probably wouldn't be able to name any current jazz
Yeah.
musician. So that was one reason. But the other was I wanted him to be a musician. I wanted to explore in part, genuine, substantive, yet unhealthy attractions. And
Hmm.
so if he was just a jerk who, womanized, that wouldn't be that interesting. But to
Right.
to be someone who, like, he's got something going on. He's got something that's really appealing to these characters. He does have something in his life that's really meaningful, and we can understand him, you know, investing so heavily in it. We all get, even if you're
Hmm.
not an artist, you understand the desire to devote yourself to a craft. And so that was one of the reasons. And I liked the idea. To me, jazz is one of the most challenging of the genres
Hmm.
to master. The intricacy of it, the collaboration involved.
Yeah.
Um, it's just, I think it achieved a lot as far as fleshing him out as a character,
Hmm.
and creating something that's kind of mysterious to some of these women, because jazz is not a part of most of their lives,
Hmm.
as well as also being what compels them, why they're drawn to him.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, you create some incredibly memorable characters. Circus Palmer, I mean, he is charismatic. Like you said, he's not, he definitely does a lot of things, some things that are reprehensible, maybe too strong of a word. I
Mhm.
mean, yes,
Mhm.
he's not a
Mhm.
horrible guy. He has a lot of good going for him. He's, like I said, he's extremely charismatic. You look that word up in the dictionary and there's a picture of him, right? I
Right.
mean, the significance at the beginning of the book that he's turning 40, and it's, quote, a predictable time for a certain kind of end to come. I love that line.
Thank you.
Right? He's a trumpeter. He loves women. He loves women. I mean, there are, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 women mentioned, featured, right? Flames, some stronger than others. So I think so. And then you, very interestingly, you have all women. All the narrators are women. All the different chapters, all the different sections, and it's just really interesting. About, I guess my question is, like, the initial thought is that the story is centered around circuit. It's this whole, like, does the earth revolve around the sun, or vice versa? I wonder, just kind of ideas about, like, centering the women or circus, and how you kind of came to those, to the planning of that.
So I think that we have so many examples of stories about men who are playboys, womanizers. I don't know, can I cuss on this podcast?
Yeah.
So a lot of the younger people who have interviewed me have called circus a fuckboy.
In the modern parlance.
Yeah, the modern parlance. Although from my understanding of fuckboy, I don't think that really fits him, but okay.
Yeah.
But we have Don Juan, we have Lotharios,
Sure.
I mean Casanova, I mean it goes back centuries. And you turn on Netflix and there's a show about a guy who behaves this way, right? And I think very rarely do we read those stories or watch those stories and see the women presented in ways that reveal their characters.